Welcome back to Beyond the Crime, the podcast that takes you into the minds of criminals with your hosts Dr. Lars Madsen, Shay Addison, and Dr. Rob Brockman.
Okay, welcome back everyone to this episode of Beyond the Crime, a schema therapy-based podcast for forensic practice. And with me today, I've got Shay Addison. G'day, Shay.
Rob, how are you? Good to be back again. Hello, everybody.
Good to be back. And I know Lars dropped a podcast interview that was about a couple of weeks ago on the topic of fire setting and arson. And understanding everything to do with that topic. So we're going to catch up today and talk about that topic, talk a little bit about, I guess, commentary on the interview and try to sort of string things out a little bit and go a bit deeper into things. Shay, do you want to introduce a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So Lars has done the podcast sort of with Dr. Kate Fritzen, who's a professor down at Bond Uni. And Kate is a world expert on all things fire setting and fire and arson. She's done a PhD in it and spent a whole career pretty much researching that. So I think in the pod, Lars sort of interviewed her, I suppose, about her research and understanding of fire setters. And today I thought our kind of goal might be to be able to apply, how would we, if we had a fire setter in front of us, how would we apply the forensic schema model to working with that person?
So today, from what I could understand from Professor Kate's interview, there were about 4 or 5 central typologies of fire setting to consider that tended to explain most fire setting behaviour. So Kate was talking about sort of 4 typologies of fire setters that she would tend to come across, and that might be a good place to start.
Yeah, there's a few main types that Kate had identified, one of them being the curiosity accidental fire setters, which are often kids or young people who might set fires, for excitement reasons and things like that, or boredom, or, whatever. And they don't fully understand the consequences of what they're doing.
And I guess some cognitively impaired people might fall into that category.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might have, I can think of examples of folks that I've worked with who would fit into that category, and they're all adolescents. They're all young people, but they don't fully appreciate the full consequences of things. Another, I think, common category she identifies the cry for help fire setters. So those are people who are effectively distressed. And it's obviously a very dysfunctional way of doing it, but it's a way of getting attention to try to get their needs met, drawing attention to personal issues.
That's interesting. Yeah. I've sort of heard cases, for example, where people would do things like break a window. And that feels like a very similar motivation. It'd be at times of high stress. You can imagine someone maybe in a group home or something, and when they're really stressed out, they'd go and grab something and just go and break a window somewhere. And then, of course, everyone would run over in the centre and they go, are you okay? What's going on? And even if it was negative attention too, well, they'd be getting help. They'd be getting attention, care.
Yeah. I worked in the UK, as you know, for a period of time, and I worked for the youth offending service in Sunderland for a period of time. And there was a big group home down there. And this young boy I was working with who was like 14 or so, and he was in this resi care home, and he just had a very deprived life. Didn't really have anyone in his life at all. And I think he probably fit into that first category of accidental fire setter initially. He set a fire in a bin in his room. And then what happened out of that was obviously, evacuation of the premises, fire trucks, all that stuff, and full on power and excitement, in terms of look what happens. And then I think he kind of morphed into more of that cry for help, because he was obviously a distressed kid a lot of the time, and realized that when he lit a fire, a lot of stuff happened, and he got a lot of attention and a lot of, unfortunately it was a really, as you can imagine, like a very hairy situation for people to manage. Dangerous.
Well, Kate was talking about another one, and your guy reminds me slightly about that as well. And there was something about she was talking about like more of a dramatic / exciting kind of pathway.
Yeah, well, there's the delinquent fire setters, which I guess, you might get kids like that might fit into as well, but they're typically adolescents causing significant property damage, so maybe those guys are a bit more like your antisocial delinquent types in groups where there might be an unoccupied house somewhere and they doss in it and then, set fire to it, that kind of stuff. But then you also have people who are a bit more sort of fixated on the big fire, excited by big fire, big events, that kind of stuff. And there's a typology of those people.
So we've got like a cry for help, and then we've got, so I'm just trying to sort of jot down the central sort of motivations that maybe those with, the seeking attention or help or care. You got those that might be, it's more very exciting and thrill seeking.
Yeah, you've got the people, I think Kate refers to it as I love fire, big fires. Those were the words that she used, which is the central focus of it is just a real fixation with actual fire. So again, it's how we think about that in the schema world is kind of interesting. It's an odd thing for most of us to think that you'd be loving that.
It reminds me of addiction, folks who would say, I love weed. Like, and they get really fixated on it in a way that it's this thing that they relate to, that it's almost in a chair. Like you could almost put the drug on a chair and have a relationship with the drug. But the way you talk about that, it reminds me of addiction. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're probably seen as the more sort of disturbed fire setters, the people with that type of.
Because they really like it. It's going to be hard to get them to stop, right?
Typology. Yeah, exactly. It's
egosyntonic fire setters.
It is. I mean, what do you do there? I don't know. Like, how do you monitor that? It's tricky. Then you got, cognitively impaired people who just like good judgment and that kind of stuff as well. And fire setting is just one of those behaviours.
Anger and revenge. This is one of the other pieces that was coming up.
Anger and revenge, where you get folks who are like, there's a bit of a couple of cases in the media recently of domestic violence offences where big acrimonious situation where the couple have split and the partner's gone around in the middle of the night and lit the house on fire with the other party inside. Of kind of, well, F you, revenge type of thing. Or serious distress, that overlay of it sort of flips into revenge. And then you also have things like sociocultural fire setters, which I think is interesting. So there can be as an act of defiance. I know in the Czech Republic, I don't know if you've ever visited Prague. Anyone? It's a beautiful city, amazing. One of the things when I visited there that just shocked me because I didn't know about it was this thing called self-immolation, which is where back in their history when the Russians had come and invaded and people were upset about that, and students in particular, they have a history of self-immolation, which is setting yourself on fire as a political protest, like suicide by fire, but in an act of political defiance. And they actually have sculptures in the footpaths in the main part of Prague dedicated to these people who did this.
So that could be sociocultural driven, but it could also be this seeking attention or help.
Yeah, just distress, utter distress. And
there's a big case of that in the Vietnam War. I can't say exactly when it was, but there was a particular date, and I can't remember. It was like, I think it was North Vietnamese National Day or something. And it was a very, very famous case of a Buddhist monk that basically called all of the media, right, to come down to the city or whatever, and said something big's going to happen, and then lit himself on fire in a very calm way.
Wow.
And just melted in front of the world, basically. And it was politically driven.
Yep.
To try to change, to get help for his cause and for the North Vietnamese and to get to stop the war or to change the views of the war in the United States and the West.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting historical case of what you're talking about.
Yeah, self-immolation, that's right. So
but the motivation does seem to be to seek, literally calling CNN and BBC and all that to come down.
Yeah,
because it's about seeking attention to sort of help.
For the cause. Yeah, definitely. So I think that kind of covers most of.
Well, the other ones they came up with, though, they were sort of saying something more antisocial in nature. So a class of, where it's either concealing some other crimes or it might be some involvement in particular fraud or something. So there's a group of people you might think of as either conduct disordered or antisocial by way of personality.
So people who have just broad criminal dispositions, who might, firebomb, steal something and then firebomb the place, or trying to sort of burn it down to get the insurance fraud, that kind of stuff. So the motivation is definitely, for some type of material gain.
So that's another one. So every now and then, I don't know, you probably get this where you are as well. You get these maybe tattoo parlors.
Tobacconists.
They get firebombed.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And it's to do with bikies and it's to do with, underground stuff and, trying to intimidate someone else and stand over them and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another one that just came to mind while we're talking about that stuff, which I don't know if Kate mentioned it, I don't think she did, is the old, in the protests in the UK when they had the protests over, austerity and things in the 80s, that Molotov cocktails, social unrest. So, I mean, that's a form of, there's definitely something being lit on fire and thrown at something or someone. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but maybe if we focused for a little bit, not so much on the socio-cultural piece maybe, but there's those 4 more internal pathways that we've talked about, and try to elicit from that and think about schema modes. Would that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it does sort of flow off. So in the case of the crying out for help, seeking attention or help, and we say this look, I try to think about this in the most compassionate way possible. Like if you are setting fires to get attention, then probably you really do need some help. So
yes,
that
I would say so.
Kind of thing. This is people that are very, very either very lonely, distressed, disturbed. If you're getting to a point where you're willing to do that to get some kind of help,
Yeah.
Have you ever had cases like this?
Yeah, I have. The interesting thing is I've definitely had clients, both juvenile and adult, who've had fire setting and convictions for arson, but I've never had anyone specifically referred for that purpose. It's always been for something else.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
no one's presented and just said,
"Oh, I mean,
just really love fire, just really love it." Like,
no. I've had my most recent person that probably fits into this category a little bit of that seeking attention, or it's out of distress or a cry for help, was a man. It was a domestic violence situation where he just had extremely insecure attachment, and he, like a history of just being incredibly stressed out when his partner wasn't at home and she was out, and he was always, wondering about what was going on. And
so he'd go and start a fire somewhere.
No, well, he couldn't find her this one evening. Like they'd end up having an argument. She'd gone to her family and just wouldn't respond on her phone, and none of her family would respond. And he was getting more and more and more agitated and distressed by the fact that he couldn't contact her to apologize. And then he drank a lot of alcohol. And then he was in their house, their home that they shared together, and in this drunken kind of just hopeless, distressed state, thinking it's all over. The love of my life is gone. And, in that moment, he just kind of literally interpreted the lack of contact as she's disappeared forever.
The abandonment schema stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so he described sitting in the study in their house, and he just had a pack of matches, like those old fashioned, matches that you scrape kind of thing, like club matches or something. And he said he was just flicking them into the bin, just as this almost in a bit of maybe a dissociative state.
Like a tactile thing, like just
and he was just doing it. And he got down to the last match, he said, and it just it took as he flicked it, and of course it set the bin on fire, and then it just, he sort of watched it for a bit, and because he was really drunk and out of his, sort of, he couldn't problem solve properly, and so he was all over the place, and before he knew it, it had just taken to the house, and he couldn't do anything, and so he ended up, fleeing, and the house, and the whole house burnt down, and then so you can imagine the destruction to the relationship after that was fairly monumental. He went to jail for quite a long time.
For that?
Yeah, for arson, for burning the house down.
Really?
Yeah.
For making a drunken mistake?
Yes. He went to jail.
That somehow seems a bit harsh. I don't know.
It was surprising because, like I said,
because it doesn't sound like he had like an intent. I don't know. At least the way he describes it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but he did. He spent time in prison for the arson. And then when he came out, he came to see me, and he was trying to get the relationship thing back on track because there were all these restrictions around his contact, of course, and and he was talking about that. And he was super confused about his own, burning the house down, because he didn't set out with any kind of vengeful intention to do that. It was more, and it definitely was when he was.
So that almost sits outside of, these four motivations. This is almost the first one. It's a kind of an accident, partly because I'm drunk.
Yeah, it's kind of two of them together, almost like, this almost like a, I don't know, like a cry for help, even though there's no one there, but it's accidental. He didn't mean to do it.
But it sounds like it was, I don't know if it's even that, because, it was more, like you said, there was no cry for help. It was just
no, and I think
I'm flicking these things. I'm
self-soothing.
I'm in a stupor.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been self-soothing.
Yeah.
And now I don't have the cognitive capacity to understand what I'm doing or how to solve the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that almost sits a little bit outside of it. But Professor Kate did talk about the role of substance, potentially, that's a sort of, it's not a cause, but it's often corresponding with some of these behaviours.
Yes, that's right. And you can see in this particular man's case, where probably if he hadn't have drunk as much alcohol as he did, it can be fairly certain that the arson wouldn't have happened, or he would have been able to probably intervene, adequately. Yeah. But he didn't.
So the second one was the pathway of more like the excitement, thrill-seeking kind of egosyntonic pathway. Those that really like it, they would be your traditional. I remember when I was a kid, people would call you a pyro.
Yeah, pyromaniac. That's right.
You'd be called a pyromaniac.
That's a little bit like fetishized, where you think people have this sexual motivation for lighting fires, and
there's no evidence for that, right? I mean,
no. Look, I've not ever come across it, like, ever. But
we can turn everything into a sexual thing.
But it's not to say that it's not possible, right? Because people can fetishize anything, literally. So it's quite possible. But I get a sense that, that excitement, I love fire, big fire kind of thing is people have a, like a real kind of connection with it, relationship to it. And for whatever reason, that's just what does it. I mean, I guess the onset and the perpetuation might be different reasons, how they came.
So let's break this down. So the first one we had, the sort of attention, connection seeking.
Yeah.
This is from a place where the person is in touch with probably their vulnerable child mode. They've got a lot of schemas that have been triggered, such as abandonment or, emotional deprivation. They feel either really alone, really distressed. And so they go and light a fire in order to get a reaction out of folks, to get some help, to get people to come and sort of intervene, to be involved.
Yeah.
And even if it's a negative attention, at least I'm not alone.
Yeah, exactly. And
right?
it's an escalation, isn't it, of a method that's probably going to be successful, you would think, 100% of the time.
Now, the second pathway we're thinking about is the excitement and thrill seeking. In the schema model, you might have a similar thing with the vulnerabilities there, and, the attachment problems and things are there, right? And the schemas can get triggered, or they feel alone and bored. But this one for me matches up to what we might be calling a self-stimulator mode.
Yeah.
So in schema, we have self-soother, but also we have self-stimulator mode. So with self-soother, it tends to be things that you engage in, drugs or behaviors that have a very soothing quality, where it helps you distance yourself from the inner pain, takes the edge off, distracts you.
Yeah.
But then we also have the what we call the self-stimulator mode, which is a different sort of subversion, which is about hyping up. It's about getting distance from my loneliness and everything by being, by being on the edge, being very excited. This is like really, exciting me and feeling thrilling. And so for me, that sort of matches that motivation in the schema model. What do you reckon?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely most likely. I've never worked with anyone I've never come across anyone in my practice who's ever had that. I think it's pretty an unusual presentation, but I agree with you. I think it's that mode, and it's just the fire's a manifestation of that for whatever reason, however that came about for them. I remember watching a case in America where they were, I don't know, bushfire setters. And I mean, Kate talked about that in the podcast as well, that there's a large proportion of fires that are deliberately set, in Australia. And so you would think that
this might be the thrill-seeking, like
exactly.
What are you thinking about, pyromania type pathway?
Yeah, like the deliberate fire setters when you're sort of out in the bush and you can create this giant, amazing kind of bushfire. I mean, it's pretty spectacular, isn't it?
And she was talking about these guys that try to get in with the Rural Fire Service and they get really fixated on it and want to be involved and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you would think that's what's happening there. It's that self-stimulator mode, and fire's the mechanism that does it for them.
I imagine if you lit up a whole valley or something, what a big experience that might be. And if you're feeling, perhaps, I don't know, you're not feeling particularly adequate in your life or effective, that can really be, a sort of almost an overcompensation.
Yeah, and I could imagine even, someone witnessing that first, doing it, lighting the fire, being part of maybe the help brigade, witnessing the whole thing. It's a huge, it's
quite a thrill.
Yeah, thing. And then having the memory of it, much like people do with other kinds of dysfunctional stimulating behaviors, like the memory of, how powerful it was or whatever kinds of feelings they gain from it. Sort of goes in the memory bank as a positive experience for them.
It's a strange thing, in Sydney, maybe it's the same where you're from, but we've got national park on basically every side of the city. And because we're coming up to it soon, actually, because we're just about to hit spring. It may be another month or two, and they'll start in the media. They'll go, it's fire season, and then all of a sudden, all these fires start popping up. It's like they remind the fire setters.
I know. That's right. Actually, it's funny. I heard on the radio this morning they mentioned, fires, on the radio. And I think the same thing. Is it provoking people to go, right?
Yeah, guys, keep it quiet. Like, just do your work. Go and do some back burning or something.
Yeah. But it's interesting.
Do you worry about that as a psychologist? You think about behaviour, like what message that sends or as a kind of trigger?
Well, it normalises it, I guess, and it is a normal part of the Australian landscape, isn't it? Dealing with bushfires, everyone knows about it. Everyone's got to take certain precautions, but it does in a perhaps a fire setter's mind might normalise it in a distorted kind of way, that we don't want. I don't know. That's an interesting concept, right?
Well, just a coincidence. Every time they mention that it's fire season, a couple of days later, there's this big bushfire that comes. So the next category was this sort of more antisocial sort of concealing other crimes, having a bit more of it like a motive behind what you're doing, either some sort of form of fraud or gaining advantage, concealing other crimes. My head goes to like burning bodies and things, but it could be, I guess it could be anything. It could be burning evidence. But a classic thing would be when people steal cars, they often would burn out a car.
Well, in Sydney, you guys are, it's full of that stuff down there. It seems to be in the news.
Only in Sydney.
Never in Brisbane. No, I'm joking. But it's definitely, you see, that's a classic MO when they have actually, it's serious crime too. They were shooting at people and, trying to assassinate people on the streets, bikie gangs, etc. And they steal cars and then they'll, next suburb over, cars lit on fire, and it's just destroying any kind of DNA that the police.
So that's another form of, it's to do with a broader antisocial behaviour.
Yeah.
It's wrapped up in that.
Serves a definite purpose. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And things like, you get failing businesses that are like, oh God, they're under the pump and whatever, but the insurance payout on a burnt down business would actually solve all their financial problems. So you get those occasionally.
But some people end up getting charged with murder for these kind of things too.
Yeah.
There were some cases, I can't remember specifically in Sydney, there was one close to Balmain maybe 3 or 4 years ago where this had happened, but it got out of control and it burned down someone's house next door to the business. I think it might have been a newsagent or something.
Oh,
and of course then they're like, well, the whole family's dead now, so it's turned into something very, very serious. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked with a young man I don't know, 10 years ago or something, where he had come along, not for fire setting, but for another violent crime. But in his juvenile history, he had an arson conviction. And so that's pretty that's a serious thing for a kid to get. And so what had happened was that there was this place on the Gold Coast that was an abandoned, what they thought was an abandoned house. Him and his mates would go there and whatever. And, the bloke who owned the house suddenly turned up one day while they were there and caught them there and was cranky, cranky old man saying, hey, get out,
Get out of there, you kids.
Exactly. Bugger off, that kind of thing. And so he was really upset by this. He was really,
riled up.
He was, and he went back at night time on his own, mind you. So he was there with mates and they all kind of left, but he was the only one that went back on his own and he didn't share the plan with his mates, which I thought that was interesting. And he went back and he burnt the house down. He took petrol. He took a big jerry can of petrol from his dad's business and he burnt that house down.
I'll get him. I'll get that guy.
Yeah, he was like, and it's so what that mode that feels like to me, I mean, that's self-aggrandizer, right? That self-aggrandizer or predator kind of stuff where it's like.
Well, I mean, there's this pathway that Professor Kate was talking about, expressing anger or revenge, right? Yeah. This is one of them. Yeah. So, right, you've got the angry child mode for sure is there. Yeah. It's triggered. Yeah. And then how are you dealing with that? Well, by bullying, like as you say, getting revenge. It's a very either bullying or aggrandizing sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, his thing I can remember because he was a young guy when I saw him, and I remember thinking it was an interesting presentation. He was so affronted. It was like that "who do you think you are" mentality. So that's very much, feels self-aggrandizing.
I'll show you.
Yeah, who do you think you are to tell me off? I'll show you. And he went back and burned his house down.
I mean, it feels very bullying as well, doesn't it? Like very, attacky.
Yeah, and this.
I'll burn your house down, mate. Like
exactly. And he was about 19 when I saw him, and he was a pretty weedy sort of kid. And I remember thinking,
you see, this is overcompensation.
I remember looking at him thinking, wow, like that's pretty, like you wouldn't, I mean, you should never judge a book by its cover, right? But it was just kind of surprising that, and he went in the night, did it on his own, in a very independent way, very determined to, succeed and win. He thought he was winning, I think.
Well, that would be very aggrandizing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If it's about winning, like I'll be the winner, you'll be down, I'll be on top.
Exactly.
Looking at, I'm just sort of going through some of the thoughts I had from the interview. Professor Kate was talking about broadly the association with personality disorders, particularly cluster B personality disorders, antisocial, maybe borderline personality disorders.
Yeah.
But it came up quite a lot too with psychosis.
Yeah.
And I couldn't quite get my head around that. What might be the links there to psychosis? What might drive, if you're hearing voices or I guess you have particular delusions or experiences, where might fire settings sort of come into that?
Yeah, I've never personally worked with anyone who's had fire setting in their sort of psychotic framework at all. But I can see how if someone was literally not in their right mind, they're having some sort of delusional, framework around how they persecutory thing or, believing someone's after them or someone's got a conspiracy, paranoid, towards them, that maybe that they feel like, that's the only way to get them back or the only way to solve the problem. I think the thinking in that process, obviously, because it's psychotic, is very peculiar, is perhaps not logical or rational at all.
So it might be tricky to understand, unless you really get into it.
Yeah, but what she also mentioned was, with serial arsonists, was she mentioned that they were more likely to be asocial people, so lonely, not socially skilled people who are, typically withdrawn people, not very well connected. And when you see people who repeatedly get into trouble, recidivist arsonists, fit into that more sort of inadequate, withdrawn, asocial. So when you think about what kind of schemas are being activated there, I don't know, lonely child, abandoned child, that kind of stuff. And what function the fire setting serves or what mode.
And then, okay, so let's take this further. So you've got asociality, like, so either, you're awkward or you don't fit in, or you're alone or isolated. Yeah. And, so you're either going to light fires as a cry for connection and help, right, and get input, or you're going to do it from more of a sort of thrill-seeking point of view, that's more engaging and help you forget about your problems and sort of overcompensate.
Yeah.
So you've got asociality, and then you've got antisociality, like antisocial pathways.
Yes.
So
I've come across a guy that had both of those. A chap, he was released from prison, and he was housed in like a men's boarding house where a lot of probation guys or, guys on parole get housed when they come out. And he was very so she was very, socially awkward, had very poor social skills, really, almost like, schizotypal kind of thing. But he could not fit into living in the boarding house because he could not tolerate the other people around him. And obviously there's, people in the boarding houses, would typically have more than average problems, people living in there. And so he lit fires in other people's rooms or lit their bedspreads on fire or their bin on fire just as a lesson, like stay away.
Yeah, right.
And he never caused massive damage, as in, and nobody ever got seriously injured. But he was known for that, and he was obviously a serial arsonist because he would do it repeatedly. Like if he had a thing against you, or he felt threatened by you, is how I interpreted it. He would then find a way.
So he wouldn't someone wouldn't take the bin out, or they'd leave the butter out of and the next thing there'll be this little fire.
Yeah, or noise. Those places are noisy, like making too much noise, or he would, invading.
I see that as bullying attack. I think he's trying to, scare them basically to say, don't mess up because, there'll be consequences.
Yeah, like invading his space and somehow like not leaving him alone.
I like the idea. I mean, I don't like the idea. The idea is interesting to me of the little fires.
Yeah.
You got just like this little micro fire, just like what? Like it just scare everyone.
And wanting people to know that he'd done it, and he didn't want it to necessarily, his motivation was not to burn the place down. It was to teach them a lesson. Stay away from me.
Don't mess with me. Don't.
Yeah. So like their sneakers on fire or their bedspread or something.
I wonder what someone like that would do if someone did it back to them.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
You know what I mean? Like, because they think they've got that thing over them, and then all of a sudden, if someone lit their shoes alight, how would they react?
I just think about the poor people that manage those hostels, right? I think, gosh, how difficult and stressful to have to, monitor and cope with that. But so he's definitely that mode. I agree with you, bully and attack. Stay away.
Yeah.
Stay away from me.
That one's pretty clear. Now, I guess where I was going with this little rant about asociality, antisociality.
Yeah.
Right. Sort of implicit in all of that is disconnection and attachment problems.
Yes.
And we don't usually think about that up front when you think of a pyro, right? The classic idea of a fire setter or someone that, might get that label. You don't automatically think about someone with attachment problems. But that's what I got actually from Professor Kate's talk with Lars, how much attachment problems really are infused into this kind of behaviour.
Yeah, me too. Definitely. You got a sense that even though there's all of these different sort of typologies or motivations for fire setting, that really at the core of a lot of them, are people who just are not really.
These are folks who are disconnected, basically.
Connected to anyone. Like they're not happy.
They're not happy in a family and, all these things. And, they're disconnected from society in a way, whether it's at the societal level, at the familial level, many of them have attachment backgrounds, social alienation type schemas, feeling left out, disconnected. So, I think it really is relevant to the sort of work we do in Schema. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, and I know there's more specific things. I think Professor Kate looks at like particular beliefs about fire and things that are very niche-y in the fire setting. Because, of course, people that are disconnected don't all like fires. Some of them go and take drugs. Some of them go and do.
Well, that's it. And I think the fire setting thing, the reason that someone chooses fire, because what we're talking about, being disconnected and having attachment difficulties and being alienated or on the social fringes or whatever, is not that's a common issue. And most people actually don't like fires, I would think.
No. I think it's relatively rare.
Yeah. And so what I find interesting is that the choice of the method of, why they're doing that.
Look, this is completely not evidence-based, but my own observations, because I think about this not just with fire setting, but with any behaviour. And I think, how did you get there? Why did you choose that behaviour?
Yeah.
And if I apply that to this, like, I think it's probably the two main things that come up, like when I talk to people about their coping behaviours and things. So I wonder if it would fit. It's often the first thing that's around, like when they're traumatized or when they've been rejected as a kid or they feel powerless or whatever, and then it just happens to be there. They stumble on it. They see it on TV. There's opportunity, but it's the thing it's almost random.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
You know, it's the kid that's
opportunistic.
It's opportunistic. It's the kid that, let's say, is disconnected, he gets beat up or whatever, and then he goes to his friend's house and he starts smoking cones, right? Yeah. And then he feels a bit better, feels a bit safer, right? So it's because of that exposure at a time when they felt disconnected, they felt unsafe, that kind of thing. So I think there's an opportunistic thing, and the other one is modelling. Like I think. If you see, if you're having trouble fitting in and stuff, and you see, for example, that your dad is antisocial and he deals with problems by beating other people up and intimidating people, then you kind of prime to maybe become more antisocial.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that makes sense. The concepts I think of when I think about these things too, which is kind of similar, overlays on what you're saying, is it comes out of the criminology stuff. Like Richard Wortley, he's a professor. He was at Griffith, I think he's in London now. He used to use smoking as an example of explaining these concepts of onset and perpetuation, and they're often different reasons. So the onset of a behaviour, the reason someone starts doing a behaviour is often not the same as the reason they continue to do it. So smoking, for example, most people will start smoking in adolescence and it's a peer group thing, right? Start because your mates are doing it, but the reason they continue smoking is because of addiction and because of other reasons. And so it's the same kind of thing you're saying. Opportunistic fire, the instrument is opportunistic, but once they have an experience with it, it gives them something. It gives them stimulation or soothing or revenge
or distraction or whatever. All these things,
or safety or whatever. Then it starts, the perpetuation is driven by, it starts to serve that purpose for them. And then you just have that reinforcement, over time. And, and I don't know if that's how Kate understands it or not, but I think well,
we get to the same place. Shay, we did it. We did a podcast earlier this year on the incel phenomenon.
Yes, we did.
And we landed on a very similar place, right? We were sort of like, these are guys who are isolated and, disenfranchised and all this kind of stuff and,
mental health
disconnected
problems.
And mental health and attachment. And it's a similar picture here. It's just that the way they deal with that is a very specific thing, which is lighting fires.
Yeah, it is. It's far more asocial, isn't it, in a way? It's far more sort of, I don't know, they're not in groups of fire setters.
No. Oh, totally. They're not. There's no Reddit forum for I hope not. There probably
I was going to say,
someone's going to tell us later.
Soon, Rob.
Rob, there's a full guide.
Do some research.
Yeah. But the problem is, of course, it's very dangerous and destructive. Like you only need one or two fire setters in town to really make a lot of problems.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. And I know that the program that Kate put together down at Bond that we got trained in many moons ago, I found it fascinating because obviously part of, what you do when you have a fire setter come in for treatment, there's a large psycho-ed part to it. You're trying to educate them about the dangers of fire. And they have she, in her program, has these really cool videos that they were specifically commissioned to make for this program. And it shows you a standard or typical lounge room in someone's house that everyone can identify with, and how quickly, when a fire is lit, how many seconds it takes to engulf an entire room. And it's not very many. And so there's a lot of these kinds of things in the program. And it's kind of, it really, it is quite shocking. It sort of shocks you into realizing just how incredibly dangerous even a tiny amount of fire can be.
I wonder if this is I wonder if this works. Does it change much? I don't know.
Well, I think for the typology, her treatment was very much about what type of fire setter they were assessed to be. So for the people that didn't have the curiosity fire setters, or maybe the people with intellectual disability who didn't truly understand the consequences, I think that part of the treatment was really relevant because it was kind of like, have a, if you understand it better.
It reminds me of the, the gambling treatment models. where they, because the big thing with a lot of gamblers is they don't realise how much the odds are stacked against them. Their cognitive biases are such that they think, look, I can actually win. I can actually beat this.
Yeah.
So they spend a lot of time showing them that, you're never going to win. You might win once, but then you're going to lose 100 times. It's all stacked against you. Then that's a part of the treatment thing. To address that it's almost like a positive beliefs about gambling. But this is almost like positive beliefs about fires. I can control them, they're not that dangerous, these kind of things.
Exactly. Or just, and the ignorance around that, saying, well, actually, here's the reality. If you even here's and look at it in video form, it's not just someone telling you, it's watch it, watch what happens, watch how dangerous that can be. Watch,
Have you ever, Shay, had a fire get out of control? Just by accident. I think just that everyone.
But I haven't, but I'm paranoid about it when we go camping, right? So we go camping a lot, some places you can, some you can't have a fire. And I'm the one that's like, you got to put it out properly at the end of the night because I can't sleep. Otherwise, I feel stressed out that a little bit of wind, all it takes is a chunk.
It's funny, in every group you got people, I'm like you, Shay. Yeah, I'm a bit paranoid. I'm like, hey, you guys, you really want to do that? It's windy. You got people like that. And then you got the people like, it should be right.
Well, this is Lars.
Yeah, right. So he's just there lighting fires left, right, and centre.
Yeah, Lars is this kind
going to sleep.
She'll be right, and I'm like, I can't. But I'll tell you a story about that. A good friend of mine here in Brisbane went round to people's house for barbecue. Fire pits are big here. I'm sure they are in Sydney. And so, they're all.
It's still in Australia, Shay.
Yeah, I know.
We have fires, yeah.
So the fire pit in the backyard, and, at about midnight they went home, and my friend texted her friend the next morning saying, hey, thanks very much. It was such a lovely night. And her friend called her back saying that the fire pit hadn't been put out properly, and a piece of wood or coal or something had managed to get blown onto the decking, the wooden decking, and and actually burnt half the house down after they'd left. And so there were people on the top floor, including, I think, a disabled family member that were lucky to escape alive. Wow. And that was just from a casual backyard barbie here. And
sometimes a good old dose of vulnerability to harm schema doesn't hurt.
I know.
Just to stay alert a little bit.
Just paranoid
our
about
schemas, a little bit of our schemas. Look, we've got to wrap up in a sec, but I wanted to quickly put our attention on the treatment aspects because Professor Kate brought up some interesting things, and it did make me think about schema, but it made me think about a bunch of things. So she talked about emotion regulation. She said, there's a pathway. These are some of these guys have poor general emotion regulation, and they get triggered with emotions, anger, vulnerability, etc. And then that would be a sort of a vulnerability factor to go and want to light fires or get involved and self-soothe or get excited. So treatment elements that target their emotional regulation skills and capacities. Second thing she mentioned was more like interpersonal difficulties / social skills. So, people who have problems managing relationships, communication skills. And the first thought I had there was, this is so far, it's just DBT, right?
Yeah.
Like these are very generic things to target. And then she's got these things that are a bit more like she called the antisocial mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people with that.
But we did get to a place where she was sort of talking about maybe the relevance of schema to some of these guys. And I guess if you look at those three things, there's a role for schema therapy in, helping people manage their schemas and the emotional triggering and the regulation. There's a place for it also in helping improve interpersonal functioning. Yep. And also we know from some of the studies that have been done overseas with David Bernstein and colleagues that folks that might have a diagnosis of antisocial personality or interpersonal personality traits can be successfully treated with something like schema therapy.
Yeah, definitely. I think the part of the other, I think some of that is very generic to a lot of forensic people that come in. It's the same kind of mode, same kinds of problems, but just a different flavor of how it manifests. I think the thing that's particular to that, fire setting treatment is that the focus on the fire stuff, like fire safety education, the particularity stuff to that, which I think probably not a lot of people would be familiar with delivering, to be honest, because it's not very common.
So there's all that kind of stuff. But then, so you got stuff, treatment that might be very peculiar to this.
Yeah.
But then you got, like, if you're, if the real antecedents are to do with feeling disconnected and alone and socially isolated, then to some degree it would just be schema therapy as usual. You'd be trying to address the person's sense of alienation and disconnection as a way of reducing the risk. Yeah,
and you'd be trying. That's right. Be trying to help them, develop their healthy adult to kind of moderate that. And the part maybe specific to fire is about the drawing on the information about how dangerous and harmful it can be to people. That getting your needs met in a way that's really risky potentially to others is not.
Well, it's going to take you away from having meaningful relationships because you're distracted, but also you might go to jail and you might hurt others. But I guess what I'm getting at, it reminds to me, this part of it, at least with the schema model, a lot of it's just schema work, meaning we're trying to help people not feel so disconnected in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that's going to put them in a place where I think they can manage some of these urges a lot better. And it's the same with when we treat, in the clinical settings, we treat something like eating disorders. Most of the time people don't respond very well to being told nutritional information.
Yes, that's right.
Or you need to eat more, you need to eat more. Like, so, in a schema approach, we tend with those sort of problems, we tend to say, okay, well, let's not get into a fight about those things, especially if it's being managed at the moment, but let's get in behind and see what's going on. How's your inner critic going? How's that angry child? How's that vulnerability? Like, what's going on for you at the schema level? Yeah. Can we start to address those schemas? And then we're going to be in a better place to think about any sort of problematic ways that they would cope.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's sort of coming at it. Schema tends to come out a bit more at the back door.
Yeah, it does. And I think some of the potential types of fire setters who might have, like the mental illness or psychosis or low IQ, those kinds of things. I always think like that, helping the connectedness through some of those social structures, which are really hard to do a lot of the time. It's like they need kind of like a COSA, circles of support and accountability, that sort of stuff is sort of helpful adjuncts to that. People that can take them out places and, kind of taking.
I wonder if there's like an FSA, like a Fire Setters Anonymous. Like,
I don't know.
There might be. No. Wow.
I'm not sure.
Sometimes having sort of groups around some of these problematic behaviours can be helpful in the sense, whether it's like AA and that kind of thing. All right. Well, that's pretty much all we've got time for today, Shay. It's been nice catching up with you and having a bit of a review of things and the discussion between Professor Kate and Lars. So thanks everyone for listening in and to this episode of Beyond the Crime, and we'll see you guys next time. See ya.
See you later. Bye.
Get hands-on experience with schema therapy at the Forensic Schema Sessions live training. Visit psychclinic.com.au/workshops for more information.